Hi, Sam.
Hi, Amy.
Hey.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
I mean, like, my friend coined the term in coronavirus adjusted terms. And so I think that that's quite applicable in the moment where I'm like, I'm fine in coronavirus adjusted terms, like I would be sort of callous if somebody was like, I'm amazing right now. I'm like, really living my best life.
You're fine for the new normal.
Correct.
Uh, well, thank you for agreeing
Thanks for the invitation. So
to have
generous.
to have this recorded conversation with me. Since this is the first one and this is the first time that I'm doing this, double thank you. But also, I just want to say that this is an experiment and it's a way to keep an audio-visual record of this moment
Yeah.
through conversation with my friends and people who are brilliant, who may or may not think with Hannah Arendt,
Yeah.
who are thinking about how this corona pandemic is going to fundamentally change the world. Um, and so you seem like the perfect person to me to begin this with because you think about and work on Hannah Arendt and economy, on philanthropy and charity
Mm-hmm.
and giving. And those questions are, I think very much in the front of a lot of our minds right now in dealing with this.
Yeah.
So that was my thinking, and I wanted to start the conversation by, you have a drink there.
Hmm.
What are you?
Naturally.
What
This
is
is a Boulevardier. So
a boulevardier?
it's a Negroni made with bourbon. And I've improvised, and it has clementine peel as the twist. That's my sacrifice for my nation. Um,
Very.
to alert the Medal of Freedom people and let them know. I think this would be. I
Well,
think
cheers.
cheers, cheers.
I went with a Campari and soda in,
Beautiful. I
in
think this would
honor of
definitely be
Arendt.
like Rent's vibe. Like she would 100% have
Oh,
like.
this was her drink. Although I'm out of twist. I ate
I
all
see.
the twists.
I see. Right. She would for sure. She would not be under quarantine without sufficient like alcohol supply.
Oh no, no. Actually, we should make an Arendt quarantine
Mm,
supply list. I mean,
yeah.
cigarettes would obviously be number one.
I
Then
can't help but
maybe
think back to
Campari.
that movie of I think it was it 2014. The It was Barbara Sukova where like
The first one, yeah.
yeah, and she's just like all those scenes of her staring out the window smoking a cigarette, and I'm like, well, I don't smoke, but like we're all basically Hannah Arendt now, just like just staring
Staring out the
contemplatively
window.
out our windows.
Yes, yes. A lot of people on Twitter have been posting paintings of women staring out windows, and it feels a little too close to home right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
real indeed.
so, in the life of the mind,
Yep.
yeah. So, in the life of the mind, Hannah Arendt asks this wonderful question: Where are we when we think?
Mm,
So, Amy, where are you, and how is this moment affecting your thinking right now?
yeah. Well, um, I have to say that I find, in terms of the most literal answer, I mean, I like all, you know, responsible people am thinking in my apartment, which is not that different, frankly, from where a lot of thinking happens, where the party's at normally, and but I, you know, um, you asked like what is thinking, how am I thinking in this moment. I find the moments that I have to really like engage with words and ideas and complexity to be such a balm. It's like it's my way of asserting that a something I can do something else, right? I can be proactive in how I use my mind and not just this like absorb the torrent of news, and that I can be active, that I'm still capable of doing things that I've trained for, right? And I think I want to come back to that because I really feel like there's this reduction of the world so much down to like just the immediate emergency and the immediate contingency, and it's warranted, but it feels so disruptive and so dislocating.
Yeah.
And the sense of like, I can still read a book and I can still have a conversation with you and I can still like synthesize and just exist at a level of activity, of mental activity that has a longer horizon than just like sheer survivalist panic. It feels like this real assertion of subjectivity
Yeah.
and personhood. It's
Yeah.
really valuable. And it's a great distraction. I mean,
Yeah.
so I've been, for our viewers, I should just say, I've been doing daily, like quick bits, quick, like 15 to 20 minute talks on my Facebook page. You can just find me. I'm Amy Schiller, or Amy the Shill on Facebook. And it's called The Shill Show, because why wouldn't it be?
Wonderful. Yes.
You know, yes. And those, the time that I can spend thinking and preparing and writing out notes and talking about that and synthesizing and responding to comments is like time that I'm not spending panicking. It's
Yeah.
such a gift.
So do you feel like, instead of withering under the weight of immediacy right now, that you actually feel like you have more space to focus your thinking because you're avoiding thinking about other things? Is it just avoidance, or is it energy?
No, I mean, like, yes and no. Like, I want to answer that carefully, because I do want to say,
Mm-hmm.
I can say that as a person who knows that she has money in the bank, money coming in, food in her house, people to talk to, things to get, you know, like, who just know, like, I know to almost every degree a person can feel somewhat secure in this moment. There's a lot of, let me put it this way, there's a lot of forms of insecurity that would undermine somebody's ability to focus in this
Absolutely.
moment
Yes.
that I am not personally suffering from.
Yes.
Right? So the fact that for me, I'm like, oh no, like I can't, like, what's my biggest problem at this point? Like, I can't go to my favorite restaurant. I can't take the subway to my friend. Like, big deal, you know?
Yeah.
And as a scholar and as a writer, like, it's really not such a disruptive shift in my quality of life. Oh, and I don't have a child at home. Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God. Like, sorry. I'm saying that in solidarity with any parents who are watching. Like,
I'm with you on that one. Yeah. My sister has 4 under the age of 10, and she's 3 months pregnant right now.
oh God.
I can't.
I
have all the respect.
Right.
Right there.
So if I say, yeah, I have more space to read and think and whatever, that's a product of having, and this is I think this is sort of key for us as Arendtians, right? Is like, this is a problem that people often cite in her thought, which is that she so celebrates the kind of higher orders of life,
Oh, yes.
that she often comes off as sort of callous to the immediate needs of the body. In fact, she seems to somehow suggest that, like, this is an issue that people have pointed out on Revolution, right? When she's like, all the French Revolution tried to do is feed people, and we all know that that's a disaster. And people are like, well,
Doesn't say quite like that, but you're talking about the chapter on the social question, so
yeah, right, yeah, exactly, right. And you know, it just is this point of weakness that I've had to be aware of and throughout my research of, because the way that I talk about philanthropy does sort of track that. It does sort of track the idea that philanthropy should be investing in things of enduring value and not contingent utility. It runs that risk, and I've actually been called out on the possibility of, like, are you overlooking the immediate needs of survival, right? So both as like humans in this moment, and also as Arendtians, I just think that question of like embracing the permission that we have in this moment, the tacit permission we have to read and think, has to be caveated and qualified and, you know, buttressed and whatever, like, both for our ideological project and for just sort of like human solidarity of like, well, what are the conditions that make that possible?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to the relationship between Arendt and philanthropy in your thinking? Because that's not, to me,
Yeah,
that's not a
it's
common
not
sense.
intuitive. I know.
It's
Yeah.
not an intuitive, but I love that you go there.
Thanks.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So um, my first synthesizing of this of her with this topic. So I just want to be clear, like I always knew I wanted to write about philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for reasons I can get into another time, but I always knew coming in that I was going to write about philanthropy. And when I first started looking to Arendt for like sort of theoretical scaffolding, it was 2012. And a couple of things happened. So first I was in a class uh, on post-war women intellectuals with Nancy Miller at the Graduate Center, just giving her a shout out. And I read the part of the human condition where she talks about how goodness cannot exist in public, right? Goodness
Yeah.
cannot come out of hiding it. It cannot, and goodness is not sort of, I'm going to say like fit for the public realm.
Mm-hmm.
And that triggered something interesting to me where I was like, that's very interesting because there's so much about philanthropy that is about public signaling of goodness. Then I encountered, so that was like one step. Another step was 2012. Our viewers may remember that the Coney 2012 campaign.
Oh goodness. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, nice,
Oh, I had forgotten about that, Amy.
fun throwback for us all.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So specifically, Teju Cole, the novelist and the photographer, had these great tweets, and
Yeah.
he coined the term "the banality of sentimentality."
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. That feels very relevant to.
Feels very Arendtian.
It feels very. I mean, it's clearly a riff, and it also seems to dovetail with the sense of like goodness that cannot come out of hiding, that cannot sort of exist in the public realm, and this attempt to really globalize sentimentality.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of like, oh, we have to save these children without like any real um, expert awareness or understanding of the conditions on the ground, to say nothing of the efficacy of like buying the wristbands, the t-shirts. Like I can't even get into it. So anyway, so those two things, that was my first moment of of applying Arendt and applying her kind of skepticism about sentiment and sentimentality
Mm-hmm.
to the way that philanthropy is practiced and discussed in public. Because I found her sort of rejection of that, like that sentimentalized affect of like of love or compassion or attachment, her rejection of that as a public phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
really helpful as a first step. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't end up using any of that in the dissertation. Maybe it'll come back around in an article at some point, but
Yeah.
then what actually came around was the more central question of my work now, or at least in its dissertation form, it will evolve over the coming years, is what is philanthropy for, in the sense of like what kinds of relationships does it foster in the public realm, and what kinds of institutions does it foster in the public realm. And so what I found, especially as I looked at things from a sort of genealogical point of view, was you could almost draw like a matrix where like the more philanthropy focused on specifying the needs of the poor and survival and like basic corporeal dependency, the more you generate relationships of hierarchy and surveillance and like unequal relationships.
Uh-huh.
Whereas like the more philanthropy is able to focus on not meeting kind of the immediate needs of survival, but rather building spaces and institutions that are kind of open to the sort of to all, to like universally sort of explore and inhabit the human condition and art, imagination, things that we want to remain in the world, the more you can potentially sort of create a world oriented more towards solidarity, right? And more towards kind of sharing. Her definition
Yeah.
in Many Dark Times of Philanthropy, she says philanthropia is a desire to share the world with other men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, so this idea of like, oh, philanthropy is meant to create a shared world, not to necessarily you know, be a stopgap the way that it often is in terms of the immediate survival of other people. This is obviously like really contested and complex and, you know, varied more
Can I,
so that that's where she comes in.
can I ask you a question about how you read Arendt on world building and philanthropy and solidarity there? Because I think her understanding of solidarity and world building is contentious. Her separation between private and public rests upon, in part, an assumption that people have already fulfilled the basic needs of everyday life in order to be able to appear in the public realm at all to begin with. And she has, I think she has an idiosyncratic understanding of solidarity. It's not a kind of leftist solidarity. It's something else. How do you read her on that idea of solidarity and what it means to build the world in common?
I'm not sure what the partisan distinction is you're making there, so I'll just ask you to come back to that in a second. But
yeah,
for me, I think about solidarity as a kind of shared recognition of the powers of I don't want to just land on self-determination, but there's something important about I think it actually comes back to her concept of natality, which is even more sort of buried in the text, but in the sense of like everyone has the possibility to create and determine and adjust and adapt and move and sort of create new reactions and create new phenomena and create
new beginnings.
New beginnings in the world. And the more that we sort of we create people who are unable to enact that level of kind of action and of generation of creativity, creation, that is what undermines a sense of solidarity. Solidarity is about that kind of autonomous subjectivity that where we're all kind of bound up in the consequences of it, but we sort of allow that everybody has that level of freedom.
Yeah, and it sounds a bit like you're emphasizing the Kantian undercurrent in Arendt. There is that. Am I picking up on that right?
I haven't like said that aloud, but I don't disagree with that.
Kantian undercurrents. Yeah, the common sense and the community. So we got this wonderful news about the package this morning, the stimulus package that was pushed through.
Somebody order a stimulus package? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yes. And who's it going to stimulate? So you started the jokes.
I did. Yes, please.
And I was looking at this on the BBC, and I had to scroll to page 2 to get to people and educational institutions.
Of course, right?
And yeah. I was just, it was like if the stimulus package was a Google search, it would be like buried in page 10 of the results, which like you would never get to the people.
Yeah.
And I just got so overwhelmed and kind of angry. I X'd out and I was like, I'm going to ask Amy to explain what's happening to me later. Can you explain what is happening with the stimulus package? And also just, for people who really want to engage in world building right now, can you talk about what we as citizens can be doing too?
I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that like there's a lot of promising avenues here.
Embrace despair.
I mean, not zero, but like I just don't, like I don't want to be here and be like, call your Congress. Like you should, of course, you should call your elected representatives and like.
Yeah.
I think what we're sort of seeing is like in the face of enormous, obvious, self-evident human need. Even like almost none of our elected officials can be persuaded to give enough of a shit. Okay, so like let's cut the shit there and be like, yeah, I mean, register your concerns, but let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's going on with the stimulus package? So I am actually not a legislative aide, and don't know chapter and verse of the stimulus bill, but here's what I can tell you.
Yes.
Um,
Good setup.
here's what I can tell you. The amount, the two things. Of the one, I think it's 1.2 trillion
Yeah.
is the number that I've seen of the 1.2 trillion proposed. You're right, Sam, that the first money and the most money is going to go towards offsetting corporate risks and corporate losses.
Mm-hmm.
And that include, and there's going to be all kinds of rationales for this, because there's a number of industries that do employ a lot of people, and if they have to lay off, blah 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 blah. There are people who would argue that like what we have here is an example of how corporations are able to offload their risk onto a government in a way that individuals are not. That's really what we're looking at.
Uh-huh.
In terms of what individuals get, the number that I am seeing is a one-time payment of $1,200 per adult.
That's taxed.
I'm unclear how it will be taxed.
Okay.
But it seems likely that it would be taxed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it may be taxed in that it's like taxed for people above, as all taxes are, right? Like tax rates rise with income.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a problem for a while, of like the Democrats looking to means test cash assistance. The Democrats looking to means test cash assistance. Because we hate the idea of redundancy, or we hate the idea of money going to people who don't need it. But like, we don't have time for those games. Like, we just don't have time. And there's really very little way of knowing whether people are actually living at the income that they reported on the last year or 2 years of their tax returns, right? Like, it's just insane. So what we're looking at is like relatively like the absolute bare minimum amount of assistance that Congress could send to individuals buried within this bill. That's what I know as again a mere consumer, a mere absorber of news.
So if as you phrased it so nicely, and saying that corporations are able to offset their risk in a way that individuals aren't to the federal government, and we saw something like this happen about 10 years ago, and we're watching it happen again. And it seems to be a kind of self-repeating bourgeois crisis capitalism story. That's my old you still
haven't explained why my solidarity isn't leftist in Arendt, but I'm sure we'll come back to that.
Yeah, this is not going to be a political conversation at all. And I have bad jokes. I'm sorry. It's not even a joke. How can and what can individuals do for one another to offset risk that the government is just failing to do right now? What can we do?
Yeah. So you have to assess, I mean, if we're going to talk about it in terms of risk, assess your level of risk, right? Like, my level of risk is fairly low. Who's in my circle who's living at higher levels of risk? That would include anybody who is like a tipped employee or a freelance employee. I cannot tell you how appalled I am. So if you want to talk about goodness not coming out of hiding, here's a great example, because it's not that Arendt doesn't believe in goodness. It's just that you don't do it for public credit. You know what I mean? You don't cash it in that.
Yeah.
Here's the thing you can do that's goodness, staying in the private realm and not making a big fucking deal of itself. You better pay your housekeeper if you have one.
Yes.
You have to keep paying your
And
housekeeper.
and not making them come to work.
Absolutely.
Keep
100,
them
absolutely.
and tell them to stay home, take care of themselves.
You must, right? It is, of course, appalling that we are relying on individual initiative to do this, but it is the situation we're in. So the absolute first thing that you must do if you employ any kind of service on a regular basis is you have to keep paying for that service, especially if you're receiving salaried income still.
So can I just ask a kind of a question there? So like if you you know, like go get your hair cut every 3 months, or if you go get a manicure every 2 weeks, or if you go get a coffee from your local shop, is there a way to keep paying those people even if you're not using the services?
I mean, the two, now we're getting tactical, which is fine. So the two methods that I would suggest for that are, if you can, through social media, contact the business. You should contact them and be like, is there a way for me to set up a payment of some kind? I happen to have, I mean, I'm friends with my hairdresser on social media because of course I am. And so I'm not yet due for, I mean, I'm getting there in case you can't tell, but I'm not yet
Oh,
due.
I gave up a long time ago. I just
listen, girl.
Yeah.
I'm not yet due for my haircut, but I know that when, like in a week or so, I'm going to reach out to him and be like, can I just PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, whatever, some money for that, and like either do it through the business or do it peer to peer, which is now easier than ever.
Yes.
I have to do that for
Venmo.
Right. Yeah, Venmo. Right. Yes. I have to do that for my clarinet teacher. My clarinet's right there in the background. I have to do that for my hairdresser. I don't employ a regular house cleaner, but I am going to send someone who has cleaned my house before, just because like she's definitely losing income elsewhere. I cannot emphasize enough how critical that is. Is it shameful? Yes. Is it more shameful to not do it? Yup.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And to not like, it doesn't need, I think what you were saying about Arendt and goodness is like, these should be common sense things
right
that we're doing in private right now to help the common good. These aren't great acts. These aren't like an opportunity to pat ourselves on the shoulders and have a good consciousness about contributing in some, this is common sense.
Yep.
Kind of every day we should be doing these things to take care of one another, acknowledging the extent to which the government is failing right now to help people.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to say two other things about that, which is that Arendt does this sort of annoying hand wavy thing sometimes. It comes up especially in like, there's a 1972 interview with Albrecht Bemer, where she's like, well, obviously, like we can figure out how much housing people need. She's like, and she's not wrong. It's just sort of like, okay. Well,
I love that. I love that 1972 panel discussion that was organized by the Toronto, I think, Philosophical Society.
Yes.
Arendt was invited to attend it as a guest of honor, and she insisted on participating.
Oh my God, so
which
good.
is amazing. But I think so. There's two things in that interview that I've been thinking about. That quote where Velmer asks, or like, so you don't really believe in this distinction between private and public, and what's an example? And she says housing. The question of whether or not everybody deserves good housing is not a political question. For her, this is common sense. This is not something that we should have to debate in the public realm. It's a question of economic administration. And of course, it's political to talk about how it is administrated. But she takes that for granted. The other part in that interview that I've been thinking about is when Mary McCarthy asks her about capitalism.
God love her.
And she says, so where do you stand on capitalism? And Arendt has this genius response, which is one of the most political, I think, for me, things that she's ever written. And she says, I don't share Marx's great faith in capitalism. And she says there's no distinction, but for me, between socialism and capitalism, that both are fundamentally rooted in expropriation. And so now here we get into all kinds of disagreements. But Arendt is not I mean, she's very critical of capitalism.
Yeah.
She's not, but she's also very wary of socialism, having seen how it developed in Europe and other Eastern European countries.
Right.
And so she never gives us a kind of alternate economic or political model, because that's not the kind of work that she's writing. But we have these implicit critiques. What do you?
Well, this is why when you asked me about defining solidarity, I thought about it as like, this is really, she's not wrong per se about socialism, because really the difference between capitalism and socialism is like how broadly you can distribute the power to redistribute, right? Like who has the power to expropriate from whom, right? Socialism is essentially like a broader expansion of like those who have the power to reappropriate. I'm going to say capital. That's not totally wrong on her part. It's a little bit like checked out of reality, but what else is new? But this, it really comes down to the freedom. I think a lot about, especially I think a lot these days about how we're all looking at graphs, and we're all looking at charts, and we're all amateur epidemiologists now. We're like, well, if you look at the curve, like, you don't know, like you
everybody in the past 2 weeks, everybody has become a doctor. Everybody has learned how to make sourdough bread.
Right.
Everybody on the internet is reading War and Peace.
Right. And I'm like, listen, like you have like a master's in like medieval history. Like you can sit down. Like you don't know what's going to happen here. But there are situations where it really makes sense to think about human life in terms of like patterns, and in terms of algorithms, and in terms of just kind of like, in terms of our us as data.
Yeah.
And then but the importance of somebody like Arendt is saying like, but also we're not just that, right? And so that's why I come down on this idea of solidarity being about like being about a kind of better sharing of risk, and a better sharing of self-determination, again, with shared consequences, right? Like, so it's really less about like what's the system of redistribution that we construct for ourselves, which is important, right? But really, it's about like who is allowed the subjectivity to like make free choices and exist, and like experience an appropriate degree of risk, rather than offloading it to others. And also the power to kind of generate something new in the world, and also share in those consequences, for good or for bad, Yeah.
I think in Arendtian language of being able to enter into the public realm, I think of that as, she says everybody has the right to appear. We all have the right to recognition, to enter into the public, and to speak and to act, and to be acknowledged, for better or worse. But she says it takes courage in the human condition. And so I also read it as, for myself, as a kind of ethical claim that we have a responsibility to one another to make it easy for others to enter into the public realm, because not everybody has equal measures of courage, and not everybody is equally capable of just stepping out into the public. And so, thinking about how can we make it a space where people feel free to and safe to speak and to act, which doesn't, of course, mean that people won't tell you you're wrong, or that you're yell at you, or any of those things, or might praise you, but we can't predict that. But right now we've all been brought in.
We have. And I do want to emphasize, I love that, by the way, and I do want to emphasize that like there are the version of material assistance that's available to us right now,
Yeah.
again, it's embarrassingly like it's embarrassingly um, inadequate. However, it's what we have, right? So along with paying people who you would regularly be paying, you
Yes.
probably see calls for mutual aid of some kind, right? You will probably see requests for cash assistance to people who are no longer wait staff or who are no longer yoga teachers you were mentioning before, right? Like,
Yeah.
so by all means, but these are all what ultimately has come down to is like, these are all ways of using your protection from risk to help others who are more at risk.
Right. And
And that's
maybe,
another form, and that's really another form of courage, is like being
yeah.
willing to confront and tie up your fate and your level of risk with somebody else's.
I love that. And it feels so right on the mark in this moment where we're seeing the worst of individualism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people just double down on a kind of selfishness,
Horrifying.
refusing to care about the collective, refusing to have a sense of responsibility to others. The imagination has been delimited somehow.
Yeah.
But I also, love the idea of that as courage for those of us who are capable, and not courage for public recognition, but just something that we can individually do.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been seeing a lot of are local businesses, so not service workers necessarily, but people who run bookstores or movie theaters,
Yeah.
yoga studios, and who are being devastated financially right now, and who are looking to raise money. So in terms of price, so let's say I'm a professor, I don't make that much money. I'm very comfortable. I live alone. I'm not responsible for anyone else. I'm not complaining, but I can afford to give some, but not a lot. How do I prioritize that?
Great question. We don't have, excuse me, just a quick second. I have to, the back door to my apartment just blew open from the wind. So
Elijah, has he joined us?
Yeah, he's made it finally.
You're okay.
Great. Okay. So, I've been thinking a lot about the extent to which, this is not a direct answer to your question, but I'll hopefully land on one. So last Friday, the Shill Show addressed this question of whether or not supporting local businesses, whether you're ordering from them or you're giving them money directly or you're buying gift certificates or whatever, that you're trying to get cash in the door. To what extent we now can consider that philanthropy, because you're using money separate from its immediate sort of commercial value.
Yes, you're giving. You're not just using money as exchange value.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So I'm really interested in all the ways that we are de facto starting to divorce ourselves. I think citizens quicker than the government, but starting to divorce ourselves from an attachment to money as something that we only use in those kinds of commercial transactions that generate like some kind of equivalent return or like market rate return, right? Like now you're functionally donating to a business that's just laundered through a commercial, which is fine. Like, you should do it.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize? I mean, you should make a list. I mean, if there are things that you do on a regular basis, just keep doing them. Because it's not really, so paying your hair, I'm not saying you should go send your hairdresser double what you would pay them.
Right.
That's just something you can do.
Yeah.
Just give them what you would normally. Really what you, as a baseline. Businesses. I've been overwhelmed with this question personally, and especially when it comes to like restaurants, because I'm like, well,
Oh,
from a frugality point of view, like I have plenty of food in my house, knock on wood. Like I could just cook every night, and like, what should I be doing? But then I'm like, you know what? Um, Now I think the only thing I can say in terms of prioritization is that the time frame really matters. If you're like, I'm ready to put money out the door I can put money out the door in the next 2 weeks, I would do it in the next 2 weeks. I wouldn't wait.
okay.
You can cook your chickpeas anytime.
Right.
That business may not be able to make payroll in a week.
Yeah.
So I would narrow it down. If you were doing it the way I'm doing it, I've just made a list of the like 3 places that I want to support.
Yeah.
I'm just going to try and order from them on like a rotating basis and just do what I can. Again, we're dealing with an embarrassingly inadequate responsibility. None of us should have to be dealing with these questions, but we are. So I think like, in terms of priorities, like first pay what you're already paying to people you're already paying, and
Mm-hmm.
then figure out who your priorities are, and like just front load your spending for the next couple of weeks.
Are there any organizations or platforms that are doing crowdsourced fundraising for individuals who can't pay their bills right now?
There are, like there are a few too many. It's a little too scattered for me to tell you like one particularly, but what I will do is
Mhm.
I'll send you links that you
Okay,
can
I'll put
include
them in the
thing.
comments.
But there are spreadsheets going around that are like virtual tip jars, right?
Okay.
Just choose a tranche of 10 people and send money to their Venmo accounts. There's one going around that's like a GoFundMe for all laid off restaurant workers.
Okay.
Again, these are all so like it's so ad hoc, and it's everybody trying to do what they can. I'm not going to promise you that they're going to be like feel like the most efficient, effective, whatever, but it's what we have at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a kind of, I don't know if it's a silly question, but since you brought up the way in which we're actually using cash
Yeah.
outside of its usual exchange value function, how do you think this pandemic might affect the future of cash? And
Like physical cash.
I mean physical cash. I mean, people are like refusing to sign restaurant receipts or like for takeout delivery or to tip in cash. Is this going to have an effect on?
It's interesting. I think it all sort of depends on, I think it's going to double down on whatever your attitude is towards physical cash to begin with.
Okay.
Like if I'm a little old school in that I think it's always good to know you have some amount of cash on, like, literally readily available.
And a lot of people don't have bank accounts or credit cards, so they
Yes.
only operate with cash.
Yeah.
But we've already been seeing a number of businesses go to a
Yes.
cashless model, and I've been kind of worried that this might
Yeah.
push
No,
that further.
in the bluntest truth, like you just never know who you're going to need to bribe and when. And like, you don't have to fuck around with their Venmo. Like they don't want it to show up on their Venmo. Like, it used to be,
Oh
time was in my day in disasters, you would want all the cash you could get because like that's
yeah, but
that's your payout.
we're not at the point where we need to be like stockpiling it under the mattress. I actually, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple diamonds up my butt now, but that's just me.
Okay, I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
And it's a total it's a total change of pace.
Is it?
But I really wanted to ask you this question. You just taught a class on the poetry
Yeah.
of Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde
I'm glad you're asking me about this. Great. Yeah.
for the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, and I really wanted to take the class, but I couldn't. And I was just, I was wondering, Arendt talks a lot about how we reach for poets and in dark times because they give us the language that we live by.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I was just wondering what you're reaching for
what am I reaching
now.
for?
What's nourishing you?
Thank you. Great question. I just read this Ada Limon poem that was really exquisite. And actually, I'm going to see if it should be easy for me to locate it.
Yeah.
So I'm also reading some Wendell Berry.
Um,
Um, yeah, which is just great for trying to remember that basically like the world is still a beautiful place.
yes.
Um, one that's really worth valuing. Um, one moment.
Are you gonna read the
I
Limon?
am, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this Ada Limon poem, by the way, this I have to give a shout out. Speaking of Brooklyn Institute, Miriam Heyer,
mm,
one of our board members and supporters and family essentially, has been posting great poems to her Facebook page, and this one just really touched me. I mean, I just have to admit, I constantly have books of poetry scattered around. I have my pocket Wallace Stevens is um, on my coffee table right now. I think a Dorian Lau is sitting around somewhere. So, I'm just a glutton at this point. But this is Donald Hall. Woof, Donald Hall. If you really want to feel some feels, that would be a good one. Anyway, this is Ada Limon because we are also amazingly, like, hard to believe, on the verge of real spring, and we can
yes,
go outside.
yes.
So for whatever that's worth, here we have instructions on not giving up.
Okay.
More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree, more than the neighbors' almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy-colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains, it's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets, leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come. Patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us. A return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it, the tree seems to say. A new slick leaf, unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all.
Wow. I love the patient plodding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Growing over whatever winter did to us, which is a lot.
Lot. Yeah. Well, all right. Amy, that was the perfect way to end this first conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having it with me, Sam. It's really good to talk to you.
It's always really good to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing you in person when all of this is over.
Very much the same. Very much.
Okay. All
Bye,
right.
dear.
Bye.